should be right there.
Yeah. Am I in or not?
You got to share it.
Where do you hit share? Where do you see share?
Your microphone.
You're in. Then you just click on that thing and it'll let the microphone. Which microphone? Right, so just put the cursor on the microphone and click it, and that line will come away from you. It's the red circle on the bottom. Oh, right here.
Mark, you do it?
Good.
All right, 5:30, call to order the board work session. Palmyra-Eagle Area School District. We have a roll call, please.
Are you roll calling top of the teachers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. Justin Thomas.
Yes.
Doris Parsons.
Yes.
Jean Reith.
Yes.
Mitzi Rashevsky.
Yes.
Michael Eddy.
Yes.
Tom Novak. Corey Jones.
Yes. All 7 members, we do have a quorum. Next meeting, we will the agenda. Everybody had a chance to look at it.
I'll second it.
Can you guys be a little louder so we can pick it up on the...
You're gonna have to share mics. We've only got 4 mics for the 7 of you, so if possible, so that Tracy can pick it up. And I have a handheld that I can certainly share.
Did you give me a tracer?
You got one motion on second?
It's been motioned and seconded to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, agenda approved. On to work session topics. Item A, health and dental options for the 2021 school year.
Okay, Al and Nikki, you're up. I've got hard copies of the agenda and the background information on the renewals for the health and dental. And the board, I believe, are all logged in and can see your screen as well.
Thank you, Steve. And I assume if everyone can hear me, I should just kick off?
Yeah, you can be a little louder. If you could increase your volume or speak a little louder, that would be helpful on our end.
Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, thank you.
you're welcome. And by all means, stop me if anything isn't clear as we go. First of all, in terms of introductions, I'm not sure how much everyone knows about myself and Nikki and ABRC. I just summarized by saying since 2002, we've been working with a significant amount of both CISA 1 and CISA 2 districts. And in large part, Steve's certainly been part of our best practices meetings for the last, however many years, specifically with Palmyra-Eagle. But since 2002, I know Palmyra-Eagle's been participating with and around the regional best practices meeting. So any questions on just ABRC or background before I get into some of the regional efforts? Okay. Is that a train on your end?
That's a train on our end, so give 10 seconds and then go ahead and get rolling, Al. Thank you.
Oh, I'll wait 10 seconds then.
should be good to go.
All right. So unless anyone has questions about who we are and what we do in terms of background, I maybe best might be just speaking of some of the regional efforts. We don't just submit the request for proposals and negotiate renewals with the insurance carriers just on one district by district. We actually do it on behalf of, right now it's over 100 districts throughout the state, and specifically region by region as well when we're working with our purchasing efforts. So we can speak to some of the statewide and local best practices as we go through some of the regional comparisons, or speak to some of the regional observations. But I think for the most part, you're probably interested what's going on specifically at Palmyra-Eagle. And so from an agenda, the focus is around what you have going on for claims, enrollment, the carrier responses, and this is for both the medical and the dental, and in the end, trying to figure out next steps, what makes the most sense from your lens from a next step standpoint. So that's the beginning, middle, and end of the agenda. Before I dive into the next slide, any feedback or suggestions on where you'd like me to focus before I proceed? Okay, what I'll do is go through it relatively high level, and I again ask, by all means, stop, or any specific questions. I can go back and spend as much time and direction as you see fit in any of the categories. So we'll go to the next page. The main focus of this page is just speaking to the first quarter noted in this past year of claims. You see the first quarter, October of 18, where you had 199 members on the plan. When I speak to membership, that includes not only the staff member, but their spouse and their dependent children. And you'll see from October of 18 through the end of September of 19, the average number of members in each of those quarters went from 199 to 173. That decreasing membership, there was a premium increase in between there. So from a rate standpoint, or the amount that was paid in by the district, remained at around $92,000. From a premium standpoint, however, claims, as you see, when you look at the claim level, that the claims, however, did go down quarter by quarter, but when you go to the bottom, the next level, you see the total premium paid in the entire 12-month snapshot of $1,092,000 of total premium paid into, in this case, courts, the insurance, and the total claims paid out was $1.9 million. So when you look at total premium versus claims, courts looks at it and says, all right, $816,000 more paid out in claims than we collected in premium. And before I go to the next page, just want to make sure the key takeaways on that was not only the loss ratio, premium versus claims, but decreasing membership. And any questions before we go to the next page? Okay. We do have a separate spreadsheet we have in a slide deck, but in the end, the responses from the carriers at this stage, you'll see a consistent messaging of cannot compete. We are continuing to push with updated monthly claims, trying to see if we can get some additional takers. Probably the most significant example, whether it's looking at the district individually or looking at putting it as part of the pool, the main response, for example, from the Wisconsin County Association. So County Association is a pool of area schools and counties, public employers in general, that we pulled together to mitigate increases. And they looked at loss ratio and just said, we're not willing to add that claim ratio to our risk pool at this stage. The other, when you look at the bottom of the slide, the main challenges we're running into is not just only the loss ratio and enrollment declining, but they too look at what they're hearing and understanding from the district's future and uncertainty of the future are all factors in their feedback. Questions before we go to the next slide, or now the next slide. Okay. The long story short on this slide is, whenever working with districts in terms of establishing future, plan design, premium contribution, in the end, there's a lot of different things you can do. I can speak to when we compare and contrast the peer, in large part, a lot of our comparisons have been, I'd say, more toward the CISA 2 direction than the CISA 1. So in other words, more toward Fort Atkinson, more toward the Madison direction than toward the Milwaukee direction. Part of that is, from a premium and a competitiveness standpoint, healthcare has been less expensive, which is in that direction, and the alignment with courts was a byproduct of that. So I say that from the standpoint, our plan design is pretty consistent with the plan designs going toward Madison from a deductible level. We have a 3,000 single, 6,000 family deductible, and then we have a fund underneath with an HRA. If there's, with the 17% increase that we're getting from courts, if there's interest in, we'll continue to do the fight with the other carriers. It's just not a very promising effort at this stage based on what the feedback continues to be. But in terms of other approaches from a strategy, where do we want to land? And it's kind of like squeezing a balloon. What are the levers you can pull? We can certainly, the general approach is, what is the target number we want to get to? Is it 0? Is it 5%? Is it 10? Whichever that number is, it's kind of balancing budget versus cultural objectives. And we, one of the things as we double back with the respective, not only your incumbent carrier, but other carriers, okay, we have the 3,000, 6,000. Do we look at a different plan design to get to that target? Do we change the amount we're putting toward the health reimbursement contribution? Or do we look at a different premium share? Right now, as a district, we're spending 85% from the district's coverage of the premium. The staff members are at 15% of the premium contribution. The part of the challenge is, from a timing standpoint, we know that the district is usually looking at beginning open enrollment, but those are some of the key questions, and from a discussion standpoint, discussion for next step. Nikki, I don't know if you want to slide the next slide. This page has a lot of information on it, but in the end, it speaks to the plan design, the contribution, not only in terms of, the snapshot of number of covered employees, but about halfway down when you look at the amount paid toward the HRA, 1350 single, 2,650 in a family that's put toward the HRA. You see the 17% premium increase, and when you factor in the amount put toward the HRA, you see where it waters it down from 17% to 14.67. The reason for that is there is not a rate increase to the amount you put into your HRA. And then if you slide down a little bit further, you see where premium contribution, the employer portion and the employee portion broken down. So back to the earlier point of plan design, when you look at the upper side, do we adjust the 3,000, 6,000 deductibles? Because in the end, with this HSA plan design, everything goes toward that deductible before courts kicks in. You could tweak that, whether that's to 3,500, 7,000. We can, negotiate with courts to get to a specific target amount. And obviously, the more aggressive you want to get below the 17%, the higher that they'll be pushing to get that deductible level. We can change the premium contribution at the 85% level. I will say you're right in the norm. 12.6% is a common employee portion. So at 85%, so the employee's paying 15, you're right in the mix of that norm. And then in terms of what you put toward underneath the 3,000, 6,000 deductible at the 1,350 single, 2,650 family, that too is an opportunity. And when you offset your deductible at that amount, I would say you are in the generous category when looking at your peers toward Milwaukee, and maybe on the lower end of the scale when you're looking at your peers toward Atkinson and Madison. So I'll hit pause and just make sure. I know I covered a lot of information in a short period of time, as I mentioned, but I want to make sure if there's any questions.
Yeah, just your last statement, but did you say that you're in the generous portion or something, and something, like, can you just repeat that?
The last statement I made in terms of how you compare to your peers,
Yeah.
when you look at how you compare to the peers toward Milwaukee, I would say you're in the very competitive category in terms of health coverage and premium contribution. When you look toward Madison direction, whether it's to Fort Atkinson, et cetera, it much less competitive, relatively speaking.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nikki, you want to move next slide, please? Purpose of this slide was not much more than to demonstrate we've moved all the way to capitation, and part of the reason with courts approach, we're finding that capitation approach is the most aggressive relative to like self-funding or WEA or the county association, some of those other fee-for-service or self-funded arrangements. And that's consistent with what we're seeing with surrounding districts as well. Nick, slide. slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dental. I'm not, if you can see the dental, right now, similar dynamics taking place with the decreasing enrollment. It's creating a higher loss ratio, not nearly as bad as the medical. It's 101% loss ratio as opposed to significantly higher than that. You see the premium versus the claims and the 101% loss ratio. Nikki, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to just summarize. What we're seeing is Delta is asking for a 5% rate increase. And when we plug in your most recent enrollment, seeing that premium with the updated enrollments taking you from about 77 grand a year to 81 grand a year, so about 3,800 more dollars per year. We right now, because of what's going on with COVID-19, discussions we're having with Delta in dental in general, a lot of appointments are being canceled, claim utilization's decreasing. We might be able to get that to disappear so that it's a 0 instead of a 5%. And that's as of today, we're having those that's pretty hot off the press. And while I can't promise you that 100%, based on the conversations, it's looking favorable. So that would, if that can come to fruition, that's $3,800 at least that we'd be looking at. Now, again, this is all contingent upon enrollment, as based on your future. If you have decreased enrollment, obviously the amount of that increase would be less from a true dollar standpoint, but we're just using a snapshot so you have perspective of if you had the same enrollment throughout the rest of the year. And that's what we're trying to have the actual rates per single and rates per family be the same so that you'd have no increase regardless of your enrollment. Questions on dental?
Yeah, keep us updated on that, and end up giving a, something that we don't have an increase, that would be nice.
Will do. We should have that within a week.
Is there any,
So,
what about dental, is there there to help us tell us that COVID-19 affecting the other side of it?
is there anything affecting?
The health care side of it, is there related?
Oh, you mean because people aren't having claims?
Yeah.
It's actually, the push is for the other direction because they're seeing more claims with COVID-19 versus less. While they may have less, they may have elective procedures delayed for a period of time. A lot of the actuaries and the underwriters are pushing for the suggested additional as opposed to decrease. And so that's our battle we have from a lot of those conversations.
Okay. Just curious.
Good question. I guess from our end, the question would be, do we want to do, knowing that we're going to keep pushing on the different carriers and knowing that there's not a tremendous amount of hope based on the feedback and the claim levels, the question would be, do we want to model with a certain targeted number? Whether, it's premium contribution or different plan design. And in the end, the number number of options will be unlimited unless you give if there's a dollar target, then we can say, here are the, in order to achieve that dollar target, here are the plan design options that would leverage against courts or whatever.
Al, can you speak to what might be an ideal relative to the open enrollment period? Typically, we would have opened that beginning today for next year. What observations would you offer relative to open enrollment for employees?
Nikki, that might be best in your bailiwick. You mind that 10, and I'm deferring to Nikki largely because we work as a team, and operationally she tends to be the operational person. I tend to be the strategic and negotiating person. So I'll let Nikki answer that.
Happy to help. So I know it's tough with summer and stuff like that, and obviously there's a chance you guys won't even go back to school this year, but usually we like to see open enrollments occur around this time, but as late as May. I mean, we do see them as late as May. I think as long as you have plan elections or changes into a carrier a month into it in advance, so by June 1st with the 7/1 effective date, then you're giving them plenty of time to make changes, get ID cards out, those types of things. If you're making huge changes, if we're moving down the road of some possible big plan changes, things like that, I would definitely recommend delaying until May so that we can do as much education as possible.
Relative to the education piece, in the past, Al, you've been more than generous with your time coming out, speaking with our staff members. If we tend to go the route of a major change, would you still be able to do that for us?
Absolutely. My quarantine's almost done, so I have like 4 days left, so absolutely.
So I have a question. I see that we're 900,000 over claims paid to money put in. I only have 1 year's worth of data here. Did we see a spike in elective surgeries or anything, knowing that school district could potentially go away? So is this a normal distribution in claims paid, or was it a spike?
It actually was a combination. It's been a trend for the last couple of years. There certainly was a spike of claims, a couple of large claimants that had been ongoing. But we have been, I'd say, for probably four years at least, that we've been having more claims than premium. We mitigated that by going from, I'd say, a full freedom of choice plan, which was with the Group Health Trust, and transitioned to courts. But then we had another couple large claimants that pushed it back up to a higher level. So it's been over 100% pretty steadily. And part of that is we just continue to negotiate aggressively. But yeah, it's consistently been over 100.
Okay, so you mentioned that you agree that there is a spike in the last year. So did you take that into account when you went to shop these things with the different vendors? I mean, I know, well, the fact that it was just an aberration.
They look at the SHA claims, if that's what you're asking. So the large claimants,
Yeah.
we work with and we share with the other carriers when we're shopping it. It's not just the full loss ratio they're looking at. They're also looking at, okay, what are the large claimant amounts? What is the status? Are they sunsetting? So all of those are factored into the discussion too. So yeah, we don't just look at pure medical loss ratio. They also look at, okay, what large claimants are dissipating. So to your question, is that considered? Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Al, to what extent do some of those high claims stay with the district when you're trying to broker a deal with someone else or with the current provider? Meaning, how long does that history stick with you? 3, 5 years?
They look at 2 years in general, but that, and I say that they weight the most recent year, generally speaking, 75%, and 2 years ago by 25%, give or take 5%. But the other part of that, Steve, is if an individual is no longer part of the plan, that's part of what we look at each month. If an individual is no longer part of the plan, we negotiate to say, remove that from the prior claim experience completely. So we push to have that removed completely. But they do look at the last 2 years to answer your question.
So in my eyes, what you're shopping and continually asking is for quotes and bids on this particular plan that we've had in the past, correct?
Right, is the question, are we looking at this particular plan right now and when we go out to market? The short answer is yes, if I heard your question right.
Yes,
And what we're trying to do is just get takers with as few of variables as possible, just so that they can get their head around it. And once we get takers, then we get into the negotiating. And they do understand if they want to have a higher deductible, that's a conversation we'll engage in, but we first need to understand their appetite for the risk.
I just know that some of the carriers now are offering their own PPO. Like Anthem, is it not Blue Cross Blue Shield in Illinois? I know Blue Cross Blue Shield up in Wisconsin, so it's Anthem here. But in other markets, I know I'm aware of that they offered a PPO where you go to the Blue Cross Blue Shield doctor network. It's a PPO, you get to choose a great number of doctors, but because it's limited, if you stick with that plan, they've had a little bit of a reduced cost for some providers, and I just was curious if that was something that you've heard or aware of, or.
Yes, so specifically Anthem, Blue Cross, we have not only included them in our engagement, but we also have surrounding districts that have, and in addition to a freedom of choice plan, they do have some, I'd say, Aurora, more narrowing of the network, so they have both approaches. The conversations include both with them. They've actually been aggressive with surrounding districts, so they are certainly one partnering vendor, if you will, that we're continuing to push and engage with.
Yeah, I just know that I have a familiarity with some other companies recently looking for insurance, and it was a savings for the employees and for the company, and the network is very substantial. I looked around in Milwaukee, in this area, all the doctors that I have, Aurora, St. Luke's, all those are in the Blue Cross Blue Shield network. So I just thought if that would be the one area that I was wondering if we could research a little, because I'm aware that that's something that's new, and I was wondering if it would be something that would help us.
We can certainly look into that further of the specific example that you have. If there's something that and Nikki, I'm not sure I fully heard. Is there anything, Nikki, that you heard that I'm missing?
I'm honestly struggling to hear her completely, so I apologize. I'm not going to be much help.
But I think the takeaway, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your ask was just continuing to research any of the Anthem options to make sure if there's something that would be competitive and or maybe more beneficial, whether it's to the district or the staff members.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in particular, it was their, Blue Cross Blue Shield, or here might be Wisconsin, would be the Anthem PPO network.
Their PPO network, yes.
Al, what would be a reasonable turnaround time for you to get some information back for the board's consideration?
We certainly can get, right now it's April 1st. We'll, for the most part, if you gave us 2-week turnaround, we can get some written confirmation responses based on the fact that, we're now in April. So mid-month.
Thank you.
Steve, my main ask would be if, when we model, and this is assuming we have takers, but in addition to any responses from the other carriers, building on what you currently have, specifically with quartz, if there's a target number in the different modeling that you'd want us to show, okay, at 5%, this is what the different options would look like, or 10% versus the 17, that's probably the main thing. I'd also encourage you to have some conversation and maybe double back and give direction on.
What you're saying, we could go to 3.5 deductible or 4 deductible, but the only other options. Or driving that out-of-pocket stuff.
Yeah, I guess if the 17%, with quartz, what I'm preparing is, in addition to looking at the other carriers and doubling back and confirming again where they're at by mid-month, the other thing I'm suggesting is, do you want us to model the existing carrier options? If there's something other than the 17% with the existing, how would you like us to model that if there's some other levers you want to work with?
I suggest price out a 3.5/7,000 deductible, a 4,000, 8,000 deductible. Bring back what those percentages of increase are going to be.
We can do that.
Yeah, that sounds, I think anything, if you think of other things too that, while you're working on this, feel free to call us, or get in touch with us to modify or change if you see things changing. Like seasonal.
We can do that. And
I mean, the 17% increase for what we had, really, I know we said it when you were looking into it. I just, it's not what we want to see, but it's not as bad as it could be, but it's also, we want to just make sure that we're maintaining and we're as competitive as we can be, given the changes that are occurring in the healthcare field. That's just like to try other things.
understood.
Al and Nikki, do you need any other direction or any other feedback from the board at this time?
I guess my main ask would be, if there's anything we can afford the carriers to say, here's what we know about the future, and I know that's, if you have any indicators, anything you can equip us with to say this isn't going to stop mid-year, this is, this will be another 12 months, and from anything you can give that the snapshot of what we have now will look similar for the next year, so that, the decreasing enrollment and the uncertainty of the full year, anything you can equip us with to give additional comfort to the carriers will help.
Okay, we should be able to do that.
Again, Al, I would say we fully intend to be operational next year and into the future beyond that. Additionally, and I know you've already beat this drum, but a number of those individuals that contributed significantly to the loss ratio are no longer literally here.
Understood. And we'll continue to use that, so appreciate.
Anybody else?
I think that's very, very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we'll put it with Steve, with your coordinator, so thank you very much.
Al, Nikki, thank you, and as we always say, we'll be in touch.
Yep, and next time I'll be there physically, so thank you for understanding.
Yes,
Right.
thank you for doing this.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everyone for managing the technology around that. I suspect moving forward, we're going to need to rely a little bit more on technology for meetings in the future. Appreciate that. I am going to, Carol is unable to be here, but my intent is to phone her and have her on the phone in the event you have specific questions of her or she of you, the remaining of the agenda. Hey, Carol, let's see, we just all logged off, Al and Nikki. I'm gonna put you on speaker on my cell phone, okay? Yep. So gotcha?
Hi, Carol.
I may need to literally navigate around with my phone, so bear with me. If you can't hear something or can't hear part of the discussion, let me know.
Okay, we'll move on to B at this time. Discussion of continuation of payment for employees during the mandatory school closure.
I'm gonna try this, does this work, okay? Does that help?
Yes, much better, thank you.
Okay. So looking for some feedback from the board, given the unique circumstances of COVID-19, mandatory school closures, et cetera, et cetera. We do have a number of employees who are hourly wage employees who, through no fault of their own, obviously are now not working. It's been suggested, and we've talked about this with myself, Carol, and Shelley in the payroll, that at least for the interim, we be permitted to continue to pay people at least through what we believe now to be the closure through the end of April. There's no action that's being asked. We're looking for some feedback on your part. A little bit of background and history is that folks were paid March the 30th for work previously done. So in essence, what we're talking about would be the spring break period for which some individuals, such as instructional aides and so forth, would not have been compensated anyway. Some people did work the Monday or Tuesday, March the 16th or the 17th, so they do have time cards to be submitted. As you know, there's a ton of federal legislation that's coming out that seems to be changing on an almost everyday basis and sometimes several times during the day. But we're looking for some guidance here. We do have some folks who have move from one position to another. So, for example, a number of aides and/or secretaries have engaged in custodial work, and we're very appreciative of them for doing that in the interim. We've had individuals in the food service department, for example, that have continued to work to sack lunches to be picked up, et cetera, et cetera. But we're looking for some guidance and some feedback in terms of how we manage payroll beginning April the 15th and, of course, then subsequently April the 3rd.
Do we have financial impacts of that? Do you have, like, total amounts that would be if we were to do?
Do not, the way to look at it is this money's already in the budget. It's budgeted for.
Okay,
I wouldn't look at it as monies that we save. If that makes sense.
yes.
How many employees are we looking at?
I don't have that exact number, but I can get it to you. But in essence, anybody that, and this is painting with a real broad brush, anyone that's a building level secretary, although there are some differences there, some people have been coming in and out, some people also have been able to do, because of the nature of their job, they're able to work at home or to modify what they're doing in terms of work. Not unlike many of you in your current positions, I'm sure you're redefining how you go about your jobs. Instructional aides, special education aides, those kinds of folks were the most heavily impacted. Our custodial staff and maintenance staff, of course, continue to work as they've been doing deep cleaning, in essence, what summer cleaning typically is like in all three of the buildings. But enough people who are probably wondering whether they should apply for unemployment or not in the interim.
Yeah. What are other school districts doing? Are you aware of what other surrounding East Troy?
Conference call that I was on last Tuesday, the vast majority of districts are continuing to pay their people.
From the information you sent us, are there any that are not? I went through that list.
Without having a specific in mind, I can't, Tom, off the top of my head, name one. I'm sure that there are some who may have opted to continue to pay with an understanding that paid work will at some point in time potentially be made up at some point in time unpaid. I think that becomes a little cumbersome to some extent. The difficulty too is for you not knowing truly when this is going to come to an end. At this point in time, Governor Evert's order is through April the 24th. President Trump's order was through April the 30th. At some point in time, there's got to be a determination when you do or do not come back to school, quite frankly. I don't know where that tipping point is. And you're all listening to the same news that I'm hearing relative to the next 2 weeks are going to be very difficult moving forward. So I don't even want to go on record as to speculate whether we're coming back. I can tell you that our leadership team hopes that we have the opportunity to come back. There's something significant about bringing closure to the end of the year, being able to say goodbye. There are any number of activities and celebrations from senior graduation to sixth grade promotion and kindergarten graduation, frankly, that are really important to children and families. But at this time, that's just speculation. Who knows?
Is there with the schools that are paying, they paying on average what a person normally works? What are they doing to judge what they should be paid, or is it just
Pay their normal rate for the hours they typically would work.
typical, so they're doing like an average of what they?
So if a person was 5 3/4 hours, they would be paid their rate for 5 3/4 hours to keep them whole.
Are we comfortable that we're not gonna say we've been out of school for 6 weeks, presumably at whatever point through the end of April? We're not gonna tag 6 weeks on to June and go till the middle of July and have to then pay everyone above and beyond what they would have made.
So I think that the Department of Public Instruction has come out publicly already and stated that they are going to waive any district's application to the waiver of required hours. So in part to answer that question, there's no makeup of time lost from the state perspective. Some districts you may have seen have already gone to the board to officially adopt a resolution to request that waiver. The last webinar that I participated in, it was suggested that if this does get to a significant period of time, the state may just uniformly waive without individual boards having to make that request. So the suggestion was, let's wait for a few more weeks, perhaps till the end of April before you have to make that decision. So I don't see that time being added on into June or July. I can tell you that one of the things that has been talked about would be a waiver to the school start date for the following school year. Meaning, could there be an opportunity to begin perhaps as early as August 1st or the middle of August? Whereas now you have to wait till September 1. So that may be bantered around and may come into play relative to a school calendar. Let's face it, any of you that have kids at home, you know they're going nuts and you know that they're going crazy too. So frankly, again, the leadership team's of the opinion, the sooner we get kids back, the better. And I believe our staff feel the same way.
So I guess in my opinion, and again, I talked to Shelley about this a little bit the other night, because all these federal things really don't apply at this point to those people in general, in any way, shape, or form, that we continue to pay those people at least through April. If we're not going to go, if we're going farther than that, it's going to extend into May, and the likelihood is we're not going to come back to school anyway at that point. Or at least be my opinion, unless someone has a different opinion. That if you get to the middle of May, you might as well not even come back, even though I think we all wish, as the principals, that you have some kind of closure, and you can do graduation, and you can finalize exams and do all those things. That at this point, my opinion would be to pay those people through April. They have a paycheck into May. That would push their paycheck into May 15th, and by that point, we'll know if we're coming back or not. And then we decide on May at some other juncture.
Are these positions that you would consider difficult to replace? Because I know in some situations, such as food service workers, it's so hard to get them in the first place that if we were to say every year off, they will get it every time, and they'll get another job. I mean, and then we have to rehire. Does that make sense?
If we don't take care of them.
Right, if we don't take care of them, they get other jobs, and then we start May 1st, are we scrambling very quickly for it?
If that's the thought that you have, I think there's a possibility that could happen. I know Rich is sitting over there checking his phone, but he will tell you that finding custodians has been a challenge for quite some time, as with crossing guards, and that will tell you the same about food service. In part, I think a couple of reasons. One, all the new hires we've made come with no benefit eligibility, number one. And number two, some of the shifts are odd times, like 11 to 1:30. So it takes the right person to be available to do that kind of a job. I would say that there's a potential of losing some of those folks. I think it really goes to kind of the question, how do you want to handle and how do you want to manage and treat your employees given a circumstance that was not of their making? And I know that's true for all of us.
Right, and the trends that are happening out there, I think you see it in the business world anyways, companies are paying because it is, to try to, I guess, to stop the pain for what people are going through because it is an act that is beyond control of individuals. And it's a good point. If you open up, if we do end up opening up, it's going to be a mad rush to get those people because they are probably more likely to find other sources of income. Other places are hiring essential. I mean, there is a number of jobs that are coming available because of this, so it's just shifting. So that could be a real problem then to try to rush to hire when you're already going to be in. So it might. I kind of agree with Justin that we should minimum pay through the end of April.
I agree with Justin, but I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. Some of our employees that are hourly are showing up and doing actual physical jobs for us, whereas some of these people we're talking about just paying with nothing, no jobs for them to perform. I've asked you about essential childcare. Are they people that we could put into those positions, or are they people that we could rotate in so that they are performing some jobs so that the people who are coming on a regular basis and doing actual work are, I'm trying to balance out the fairness of it, and I understand about treating our employees well. However, it goes to treating our employees that are coming to work as well as those that we want to retain that are not coming to work. And on another note, I want to know about like our occupational therapists and our speech pathologists and some of those that might be contractual workers. What are we doing about them?
There are some of those positions specific to special education students where it's likely that the goals of the IEPs are probably not being met at this present time. So there may have to be a requirement that there be services that extend beyond a return date, potentially into the summer months if that's what happens. So
But are we paying them in the meantime when they're not performing services, or are
some of those individuals that are contracted are performing services such as speech pathologists, as an example, are sending home information for families and children to work on. The question becomes, are they truly working on them, and are they progressing relative to IEP goals? So when we've had communications with Julie Bremen, she just hosted a webinar the other day with all of our special education staff. That's the question is, part of it's maintaining contact with those people, just like our regular education classroom teachers are doing, maintaining contact with families and so forth. But it's all likelihood that some of those positions for some of those students are going to need services, whether we come back or not this current school year into the summer months, so that they can get back to meeting their goals and objectives. But to answer your question, contracted employees are currently being paid, yes, all contracted employees.
okay, so then back to the issue of those that are performing services currently and earning a paycheck, and those that are not currently performing services. Is there a way to rotate them in? I mean, I think we have a very intelligent staff and they're very adaptable and would be able to do anything. I think if like the food service people need some relief or the custodial staff needs some relief, maybe they could fit into those positions.
We've talked about that at the leadership team level, and we've made those provisions available to people if they so chose to do so. I can tell you the food service prefers to utilize their staff members because they're overseeing the foods that are being disseminated. Rich is here. I know that his folks have been working very diligently. All of the buildings are in pristine condition, basically other probably than vaccine hallways, correct, by this point in time. So I don't know if you have any comment you wanted to weigh in on there, but I think that the question becomes for certain people, there's no work for them to do. You would be making up something for them to do, and I don't believe that benefits anyone.
So my opinion would be that we pay those people who have come in, and then you pay them what everyone else is getting as well. Because again, you're gonna run out of things to do, and I'm gonna guess we're about at that point, at this point. So we're talking about 1 or 2 weeks.
Hey, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Just to clarify, I can't speak for another building, but I only have special ed, and they are all working a certain amount of office hours, making contact with kids, and then working with their special ed teachers. I think what my point I was back to keep up on it, I can't document 5.75 hours for them. But if I need them, they're available. And right now, that means more to me than anything, that I can call one of my aides or our translator and say, hey, I need to find this kid, and that they're able to do that. I made 47 phone calls yesterday trying to track kids down. I need some help doing some of that, and those are people that from their home can help out and do some of that. I think if we continue to pay, then the expectation would be if we need you to help, custodial or whatever, that they, I think, would be more than willing to do that. Now, I obviously can't speak for all of them, and I won't, but, you know, my people are willing to help and do whatever they can. And if we continue to pay them, I think that's a reasonable expectation with reasonable notice that they're able to help out and do some of those things. I did mention in one of the other districts I know, they're using some of their hourly employees to just cold call every family and just try to make contact and say, you know, Doris is going to call all the aid, and
And I don't see our people saying no, quite frankly. If we ask them to be engaged in something, they're gonna do it.
I mean, I think those are two different scenarios. In Carrie's example, those people are doing their job remotely, whatever it is. Those people should be bumped to their, whatever their hours are per month, say 40. Yes, maybe they didn't come in, but it's a different scenario where I'm an aide and I can't come in, or I can't do something, and then I went and helped clean the buildings or do something, and I did something outside of my own job that I was hired to do. That to me is a completely different situation, that those people should get paid the time they worked. You know, otherwise everybody would just go, just pay me, I'll stay home. Why do I want to come in when they're going to pay me the same if I just stay home?
I would suggest that if people are in agreement, that I be able to let people know as soon as tomorrow morning that they're going to continue to be paid. I think that will be a tremendous stress relief for those individuals who are thinking they're not going to be, or perhaps need to look for another position or need to apply for unemployment compensation. I think the expectation that we would also include in that would be, if called upon to assist, either in their area that they're most comfortable with or in some other way, as was suggested in terms of rotating through, they'd be willing and available to do that. I think that will help create relief for a lot of people that are just wondering. Again, they were held whole through March 30th, so really, again, most of them had no expectation for payment during spring vacation anyway, spring break. Now it's starting to become real. It's become very real. I know that the number of participants in picking up meals on a daily basis has increased significantly after spring break than it was before spring break. And as we get deeper and deeper into the situation, with fewer and fewer people having the resources necessary, I think that will continue to increase. So if we can release that anxiety for folks, that would be huge.
Yeah, that's why this was important for us to meet tonight, because we had to make these decisions and let the anxiety of the people that, you know, that are employees of this district feel safe, that we're here for them, and that we're able to get together and make these decisions made to these times. So, good job.
So Steve, are you talking through the end of April or through the end of this?
We initially talked about it, Tom, as extending temporarily through the end of the month of April, and then reevaluate the situation as circumstances and other determinations are made. Again, clearly, if we know we're coming back at a certain period of time, people can ramp up and gear up to return to work. If this is extended a significant period of time, I think we do need to reevaluate this conversation, although I don't know that it changes significantly, quite candidly, from the human perspective of human resources.
Because we're looking at, from May 1st, 5 weeks, additional 5 weeks probably, roughly. So, I mean, I'm good for the month of April because we're all in limbo here. Nobody knows what's going to happen a month from now.
I think, so Michael said that he would agree along the way. I also think that we need to reevaluate it at the end of April, and there may be new federal guidelines. And in the meantime, we need to issue conversation to these employees that you may be called upon to do some tasks for us, just so that they're prepared for that. And it may push them a little bit, but I think that we have the staff that would be.
Go ahead.
No,
Well, we could also, we could switch over to waxing floors. We can have a regular crew that is familiar with waxing floors. We can start waxing floors. Because if we do start early next year, we're usually waxing through about the third week of August. So we can get a head start on waxing floors. Even if we come back for 4 or 5 weeks, it's not going to affect our floors. And so if somebody more aides or secretaries want to come in and help clean, we can teach you to clean it in a couple hours. You know, we get started on the floors and moving forward with that stuff. So we do have additional work if somebody's looking for it.
Well, I would think our libraries would have some work to be done as well. Like they
current school year and not return. There are staff members that are going to want to get back into their classrooms to take out personal effects. And what that means is those rooms then need to be deep cleaned a second time, because potentially there may be a contagion there. So I think that that's also an opportunity to engage some of our support staff in that type of work as well, to assist in that process. Thank you all for the feedback.
Could we also, though, have you do some tracking along the way so that we do know, like, how many hours people are using? So we, maybe in the event that there's certain positions we would like to continue to pay in the future for other work, or just so that we have some documentation of it?
I don't see a problem doing that.
Thank you.
You got it.
So are we gonna then go back and let those people that submitted PTO or leave their time off, leave, whatever, how are we gonna adjust for that? Because that's gonna cause a problem. Right now, if I've been here 5 years, I may have 4 sick days and I can make it through another 2 weeks because I submitted sick days.
I think you would reinstate that leave. It'd be not unlike if a person were to take a personal leave and we had a snow day, that day is given back to them. That would be my recommendation.
One more.
Again, keep them whole. Yep, sorry. Okay, so through April 30th, then I think we will have additional conversation relative to those folks who did convert to other roles and what we might be able to do for them. Maybe a different conversation. Okay, thank you all. Carol, are you still there?
I am.
Were you able to hear most or all of that conversation?
Not all, but I got the gist of things. I couldn't hear some in the distance very well.
Okay. I can always set the microphone. I can talk about my phone, too.
No, that's all right.
All right.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to C. Possible modifications to the employee handbook.
What I want to do, Steve, is just get a chance to maybe update some of the things that we mentioned that were older in the handbook. If we could, just take some things out that, if they only apply to like now maybe 2 people or that they weren't in there in the full general handbook, if they could just be taken and then just put into that personal file or in another way presented to them. When we talked in the meeting, it was mostly around the part where I think it was just down to like 3, like Steve requested a couple people, they were here free at 10 type days, where they were entitled to some compensation.
Right, so that's the post-employment benefit section. The language is similar whether it was a teacher or administrator. Given current circumstance and a resignation received but not yet acted upon the board, there's now only one individual left that would be eligible for that. It's in the handbook basically with individuals unnamed. At that point in time, obviously, right after Act 10, that was a significant number of individuals. I believe I was told there were 19 Act 10 retirees in the district, which is an appreciable number of individuals at that time, at one time. I can certainly take a look at it another
Yeah,
way.
just ask if it could just be removed now, since it really doesn't affect the whole general population.
Is the implication that the benefit then not accrue to that individual either? You're not removing the,
No, I'm not
the
moving it to that
eligibility?
the prior decision that has been made. I'm just saying that going forward, when an employee sees the current handbook, this doesn't apply.
Okay. Question?
Well, I mean, it has to stay in there for that person.
But it could
You
be
can't
maybe
take it out.
done in a different way.
Well, then you have 2 different handbooks for.
No, no.
What I can check to see if we could do would be, could that be an addendum to that individual teacher's contract?
Yes, that would be what you would do.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, correct, you would have to.
Okay, I'll pursue that. Anything else? We update this handbook every year. Generally, it's pretty boilerplate language.
Yeah, the rest, I really didn't feel anything. Yeah, you're right, the rest is pretty good.
There is one section that I wanted to point out to the board that I caught when I was reviewing it, and that is that we previously had made available to employees voluntary payroll deduction for certain expenses like prescription medication and child care. It was voluntary. The renewal date for that was January the 1, and not knowing what the determination was going to be from the Voluntary Appeal Board, that date has now come and gone. So in essence, it's a flexible spending account. That option now is no longer on the table because we missed the renewal date. We had maybe 6 or 8 people that used it, so it was not heavily used at all by our staff. That section will come up.
Okay. So wait, does that mean that we won't be offering flex spending?
That is correct. We missed
Flex
the-
going forward?
We missed the renewal deadline, which was January 1st, for this coming year, that's correct. It impacts those 6 or 8 people that utilize that.
And you could
Right,
set it up
but
next year.
can't, that's what I was gonna say, is, so then it shouldn't really come out of the handbook, just the date should be maybe adjusted.
I'll look at how it's worded, but again, we missed the renewal date, so it's not available to an employee.
The
Either-
current, so if with new hires in like August,
It's the plan, it's not the individual. It's the plan renewal date was January the 1st.
but couldn't we have a new plan?
But for 2021, they would want to be able to sign up then for the following year on that January 1, am I right?
But that's my read of how that is worded. So the renewal for January 1 is for the following year.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I don't think it should come out, if we're looking at it for the next year, am I right?
Well, that's the question, or will we continue to offer an FSA?
The handbook is for the 2020-21 school year.
But January 21 is part of their employment,
Is the renewal date, correct?
but that's part of their employment.
Let me look at how it's worded.
Okay.
Yeah. The point I wanted to make to the board is that that option is not going to be available for those who utilized it for this coming school year.
Okay, we'll move on to the staffing, anticipated staffing for the 2020-2021 school year.
Am I still on? Yep. Okay. All right, so the board had taken action in March. You might recall we had any new hires coming into this particular school year signed a contract that had layoff provision language in it. There were 15 individuals that were identified to receive that particular layoff. In the letter that was sent to those individuals, 2 of them have already submitted letters of voluntary resignation to avoid going through the non-renewal process. At this point, none of us planned for COVID-19 to happen, and I think people's minds now are on other things, and these people are coming into work, they're preparing lessons for our kids, they're doing all the things that we would expect them to do. Notwithstanding that fact, we still have a state law that we have to wrestle with, which is by the end of April, we need to non-renew those individuals. We issue a consideration of preliminary non-renewal and then a final non-renewal at some point in time prior to the issuance of new contracts. Other teachers honored before me the 15th. My intent is, at the end of this week, to send a reminder to those 13 remaining individuals, hey, don't forget this is an option. If you'd like to have a conversation around this, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to speak with you. It becomes a little bit more difficult to not engage in that face-to-face conversation. What I'm leading up to is I'm hoping that that number is winnowed to 0, but if not, on the April 14th agenda, there will be a number of individuals we'll bring toward the board in closed for you to take action upon to issue the consideration of preliminary notice. Again, keep in mind that the board had requested the leadership team to come up with staffing recommendations, and candidly, because those individuals had at the time signed what they thought would be one-year contracts, not knowing the state of the district relative to dissolution, it shouldn't be a surprise. And I know the principals have had conversations with these individuals up to and including as early as today or as late as today. So just be mindful that's forthcoming.
Discussion of the 2020-2021 employee wages.
You heard Al talk about the benefit side, the health and dental insurance side of the equation. I know Carol's been looking at building a budget, and initially we included CPIU, which is 1.81%. I'm wondering if the board has any thoughts to not offer the 1.81%, offer something different than that, less than that, no increase. I know Carol is working on building the budget. That's a huge piece for her to consider in building that budget as you're looking to become operational again next year and into the future. As an aside, just as additional information, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, the total of those who are going to be issued the layoff, non-renewals, and recent retirements or resignations totals about $1 million.
Correct. Yes.
Of the 2 or 2.5, is 2.5 still in the ballpark, Carol, to cut for?
2.5, say that again?
2 to 2.5 million is kind of the target as you're building the budget up from 0.
Well, what I'm doing, the difference between, what I have right now is I plugged in closing the Palmyra Elementary School, a 1.81% wage increase, a 17% increase in the health insurance, laying off those 15 staff members, and all the administrative layoffs. I increased unemployment compensation. There's a principal and one retirement, so I adjusted their wages, but set up an OPEB for both of them. And then I increased the open enrollment out to the 106, and I increased workers' compensation premium, and also increased short-term borrowing interest. And right now, you're within $800,000 of equaling your revenue. Your expense budget equaling your revenue. Which is, it's always been the goal, is that revenues equals expenditures. And that you're within 800,000, but there are certain things that are not included in this scenario, such as the administrators that you are bringing back. And we haven't talked about support staff either, with the closing of the Palmyra Elementary School.
Thank you.
That's basically the budget model you gave us.
I didn't hear the question.
Carol, Justin just asked if that in essence the Baird model, the budget model that you reviewed last.
Yes, a few modifications. That it is the Barrett model. I did increase the open enrollment out based on the poll from yesterday, and I think that also, I don't know if I had the teacher who was retiring included in that, but yes, it's based on that Barrett model.
But again, if she's saying 800,000, this sheet says 798, so we're right in the same.
Yeah, I rounded up. It's actually $759,353.
So 40 grand.
As much as I'd like to see our employees have a cost of living increase, in order to make our budget balance with the number of open enrollment people, I don't see that we can offer our employees any raises. I think we have to build our budget with the wages staying stagnant.
Carol, how much is the 1.8% for do you know that off the top of your head?
The 1.81% is just a second. I'm just going to look quickly at Fund 10, 2021. already taking account of those individuals who were laid off, so just let me tweak this a little bit.
Right, Carol, I don't think that's, you said 316,000?
That's not the right number.
No, that would put our payroll at 15 million, 16 million almost. Just payroll.
Well, as she's looking, I just don't think a district that's in the position this district is financially, where it was almost to the point of dissolving, I don't know that a pay increase, as I agree with Missy, it would be nice. I work in an organization that there were years that we weren't able to give pay increases. It didn't lose our people. I mean, I don't, it's a bigger number for the district than that 1.8 is for, our salaried employees. Do you think it would have that, everyone's gonna leave now because they wouldn't be getting, I don't know that if I worked in this district at this point, I would be expecting a pay increase. I would be wanting the district to stay open, and if I remained in this district to this point, throughout the dissolving and everything, I actually think I'm pretty committed to this district and these kids. And, I would be willing to sit it through for a year and see where the district's going and be part of the solution.
Okay, I have a difference here. What I did is I made a 0% increase on salaries, on all wages, and that will also impact anything that is percentage driven, such as retirement and FICA. So now the scenario difference is $112,163.
All right, Carol, now, we're $800,000 short yet. Does that include any administrators in there?
Is that what?
She said no.
So that's no administrators.
Tom's asking if that figure includes any administration.
No, it does not. 'Cause I've not heard who's coming back and for how much money. It
That's
does not.
minimal compared to the rest of them.
All I've done is taken everyone who's been laid off, I've taken out of that budget. We haven't talked about, are you going to bring all of the support staff back? Are you going to replace all of the administrative team? I don't know those answers yet.
Okay, so let's go from this standpoint then. What is that number right now? What is our administrative and support staff right now? Because we'll meet somewhere in the middle then, is what we're going to do.
Hold on.
Well, we don't have to bring back one.
No, I know that. What is our number now? And then we're at 0 here, and we're paying this right now today.
The question was, what's the current budgetary impact of the administrative salaries and benefits? And what would it,
Administrators, am I understanding that right?
as a group, correct?
As a group, it was $685,468.73.
$685,000, okay.
Carol, I don't know that,
That's wages and benefits.
so we're talking about just wages, though, we're not talking about
Okay,
benefits.
wages was $553,175.
Say that again?
And that's including 36
Was
administrators.
that 550,000 or 560,000?
Okay, so what is that?
Okay.
So what is our total wages for the district
Total wages,
projected? Because when you give me the percentage, that math doesn't add up. That puts our payroll at 6 million.
total, well, do you want me to put the 1.81 back in or leave it at 0?
I just want you to tell me what it is today, for this year.
Okay, but this number has a 0% increase for 2021, and it has all the layoffs, the administrative team and the teachers that were designated to be laid off. So now our total wages is $3,049,650. That's a 33%
of those other things that are percentages will increase as well. So it's not a $54,000 number you're talking at because of our contribution to FICA as well as our contribution to their retirement. It goes up exponentially, so it's at that $112,000.
I have a question for Carrie, since you're sitting here. You have a few of your staff. Do you, you may not know this at all, but in being in the building, talking to your staff, going through all this, do you think your staff is expecting an increase in this type of financial climate this year?
I'll be real transparent. I'm gonna talk about money right now.
Okay.
I don't. Jeff, I don't know if you want Jeff to talk. He did. I was not in any way a part of that.
If it's appropriate, I would love.
Yeah.
I will start with this. I mean, the reason I think it's important that you deal with this is because if you don't do something with salaries and big contracts, you are going to start losing more and more people. The two people who've already turned in their resignations, both of them said they don't mind resigning, they just don't want to non-renew, they'd love to come back. Get a contract in their hand, they'll both be back. I know that about both of those individuals. This is a list of the Eagle, what would be the Eagle staff that was put together by Mr. Lewis and Mr. Stick.
Let me give the microphone to Mr. Cordomasi. Hold on just a second.
I can be pretty loud. I spent a better part of Thursday and part of Friday talking to as many staff members as I could back before we closed down. And I told them that I was doing some work with the board, trying to help them salvage this thing, but this district, if it's going to exist, has to reinvent itself. And I told them there were three things that I thought had to happen in order to even have a chance to make that happen. And those three things were take a 5% cut in salary for the teaching staff, go to a 4-day week, and close the school. I think the hardest one of those three are already did when you close the school. Financially, that comes out. The numbers that you were struggling with, I think, in the annual report, the instructional salaries were about $4.4 million. If you cut 5%, you're saving over $200,000 if they took a 5% cut. I talked to, I would say, 2/3 of the staff that I had interaction with, either in one of those meetings that I had with staff, or one-on-one conversations, or exchanges in email. Most of the veterans, not happy, but they said, I'll take it. I'm committed to this place, and if it's going to help us exist, I'll take 5%. In fact, I had 2 people say, if we took 10%, they'd help more. And I said, 5% is plenty. They were more worried about the youngins, those people that have been here a year to 3 years or so that are over on the salary schedule. They were feeling hurt for them, that those people would struggle. Although there were a few of them that also said things like, there was one that says, boy, if I had those Mondays off, because I think this is a package deal. The 4-day is a big sell to teachers. I think it sells students from all the research I've been looking at, and I got piles of it here. It's less of an appeal to parents, especially of younger kids, but I think we got that solved because we're talking about having those days, those Mondays that would not be school days, still having school for those people that would be here. There'd be no food service, there'd be no transportation. If you want your kid here, you're going to have to get them here on your own. But there would be alternative activities. We'd have plenty of staff here to do things, everything from community service to remediation to hobby activities to whatever they want to get going. And teachers would have to work some of those Mondays. They're on a 186-day contract now. If you went to the 4-day calendar, they would have to work, their contract would probably go down to like 174 days. So they'd be taking a 5% cut in pay, but they'd be working 12 less days in the year. More hours in the day because the day's going to be 30 minutes longer. I mean, there's trade-offs here. I think the majority of your staff, if you get contracts in their hands in the month of April, you won't lose many people. You'll lose some, but I don't think you'll lose many, and you won't lose many other veterans. he was at one of the meetings when I was at the elementary school. I told him, I said, when I did the math on this thing, I thought, well, 5% would be really good. So what we should do is say 7% is what we want to cut, and I go back to 5, like, you know, we came back and helped you out. But we didn't do this.
It's broken up, but, there's one issue here, and it's just, I'm just gonna bring it to your attention, because you need to be aware of it, is that, a decrease in salary like this, it could impact the district, meaning their maintenance of effort for spec ed. So what normally happens in spec ed is we get IDEA flow-through monies that we use to pay for some high-end, students that are being transported to other facilities for their education. We pay that out of IDEA flow-through. But if we reduce the wages for the spec ed department, and from what I understand is for teachers only, that is not an exception that is approved by maintenance of effort. So we would have to, instead of paying for those higher end kids out of that flow-through money, we would have to pay them out of district funds to keep our maintenance of effort up to an acceptable level. Just so you know, just be aware.
But that amount is not, first of all, the higher end teachers are the ones with the big differences. The aides still would fall under that. They're not going to get a cut.
They would not get the 5% decrease.
Correct.
But
Just
it's
talking-
still, it's gonna have an impact on your maintenance of effort. Just-
Yeah, but
It's gonna have to be reviewed very carefully.
it's not anywhere near what you're going to be saving in that $5 million, because you're going to be over $200,000 savings.
Well, that doesn't add up either. Our payroll's 3 million, you can take 5%. That's 150,000.
It's 4.4 million according to our annual meeting book. Now, maybe it went down because of the loss of teachers, so maybe a little less.
So you're at 150, so other, like that, Medicare, all those retirement, call it 200, 250.
I was figuring 200 conservative, but
Right,
it's,
no,
it's
3 million
more
times
than
5%
that.
is 150, so.
And then add on, it's going to be closer to that.
The comment that I would make relative to the commission, thank you. Relative to the staffing, in one elementary building is this is overstaffed given the numbers of students that are anticipated to be enrolled. You might recall we had that conversation that in some cases you would not have 2 sections of each grade level. That would result in maybe 9 students in a class. And I think that, again, given our circumstances, it would be irresponsible to the taxpayer to do that. Wonderful for kids, but that's and the other thing I would mention to you is that I believe if you are offering a program, it's not unlike 4-year-old kindergarten, which is voluntary, you still need to transport. I would want a definitive answer on whether transportation would need to be provided, and in fact, whether you would have to offer meals. I don't know, Carol, if you have any opinion on that or any knowledge around that, but we want to check that out. In other words, if you're offering a program, I think you need to get them here and you need to feed them.
Well, okay, now this is the first we're actually able to meet together as a board to even discuss some of these options. So I would like to see those things fleshed out and brought back to us or given to us as soon as possible. Because I think a savings like that, everything I've read on the 4-day week, which I didn't know if I was all that thrilled about in the first place, but what it does for you is it helps you retain and attract really good staff. A lot of the stuff Tom, you sent. And most of the districts that it started in, there was some people very much against it, but after the first year, it was a very positive thing for the students and especially to attract and retain staff. So if there are those other issues, and we've been throwing this around for a while, I'm kind of disappointed those things weren't fleshed out yet. But if we could flesh all that out and actually see real figures instead of trying to use our phones to get percentages, I think I would like to look into it.
So, I just want to make sure I understand it, because that's why I haven't costed anything, is I didn't understand what this meant. So you're going to go to a 4-day week, and the 5% decrease in wages is that's in exchange for the less time?
This is the first time we're discussing it, Carol, so I think,
I thought you made it sound like I had missed something, and I
speak to that.
I think Carol and I are disadvantaged in that this is the first time either of us are hearing about this.
I think all of us.
Well, as I
Well, right, yeah, she
The calendar that Carrie's put together is 161 school days, and it's primarily Mondays off. Got a copy of it, if you want to see it.
Well, and actually, as far as your hearing about any of this, when we spoke with Jeff as a full board, we did direct him to talk to the staff about taking a 5% pay increase. Not to say the one we were there. Now, that didn't go with anything positive. It was just, he said he was talking about it, and we all said, yes, go do it.
Right, this is our first real conversation.
Right, we had a
Right,
chance
but I'm
to
saying-
That's where I think Carol she didn't grasp it.
Yeah, but I.
Carol, the intent,
Because we're not meeting behind people's
the intent is to reduce transportation costs because you have less transportation, obviously.
Well, it depends on the contract with the bus company, but it's less days that they have to transport, it's less fuel that they have to burn. I mean, there may be increase because of the change of what the schools and the routes are, but 4 days, 161 days is less than 180 days of bus ride, so 176.
Fuel will go down, but the fixed cost for the bus company is still gonna.
Right, that's still something you gotta negotiate.
You're gonna save the fuel of the fifth day.
The reality is, from the, I've got 4 different articles that I printed out here that you can look at, but there's tons of stuff if you look on 4-day school. Nobody in Wisconsin has done it. You'd be groundbreakers here. Although there are plenty of schools that are doing it out west. Colorado has more schools on 4-day than 5-day. I think that one article said 260 school districts are on 4-day school. There is a trial, and there isn't a lot of research on it, but typically what's been said about it is this: kids love it, teachers love it, parents of young kids hate it because of extra childcare costs. But I think we're covering that if we keep those doors open for those days for those kids that want to be here. Some research says that kids do better because the absentee rate goes down. The convenience of having those days for when you have those orthodontist appointments. For a lot of them, I know in my family, it will wind up being grandma and grandpa day probably. There's a lot of pluses that you can actually put into it. I would just say it is a bit of a trade-off for the teachers. It makes taking that 5% cut in their salary a little more palatable. That's part of the thinking. And frankly, if this place is going to go on, it's going to have to be something different than it's been in the past. And so you're going to have to do some unique, daring things, and I would say this would be one of them.
So, can we have Carol calculate with a 5% reduction in wages and flat wages? Because even if it's only $54,000, that's a trade-off with another teacher.
So Carol, did you hear the question?
No.
Okay, look.
The request was made to do a calculation of wages at 5% reduction and 0. The question would be, for which people? Are we still laying off, non-renewing those individuals that have been identified to be laid off and non-renewed as part of that equation?
I
So
would,
they are active numbers, what I'm doing.
I would think the staffing on the second sheet, which is the combination, the most conservative staffing for Eagle Elementary. And then administratively, which we haven't discussed, but we've had multiple applicants for a part-time business manager and a part-time superintendent, and then we were looking at a principal at each of the 2 buildings. And then our assistant and principal at the high school, middle school in the same sort of capacity.
Did you hear that?
I heard part-time.
So
A comment was made that it would not be a total building closure, but there should be some savings. I do think we would need to investigate whether transportation is still required and whether serving meals is still required.
Okay.
I think we can get that easily enough from the weekend.
Yeah. Okay.
So as a 4-day, that was, F.
Yeah, that was the next one. Oh, absolutely. No,
We
this
need
is,
a working session.
yeah, this is just getting everything out.
Yeah.
Everything we discussed as a more major issue.
So I have a question. Mr. Tormasi, I have a question. You mentioned that, we have to kind of have a paradigm shift here in this district to something new. You mentioned that there were 3 things that were key to us being successful. One was the closure of the school, which we did. The discussion of reduced salaries, which you had, and then the 4-day week. Can we survive without going to a 4-day week? At least in the first year, because this is a huge decision that needs to be well vetted out. I mean, Colorado seems to have their own thing going on. Traditionally here in Wisconsin, no one's done it. And those that don't like change are gonna buck the system. And dare I say what I've read on social media, which unfortunately I poked my eyes into, I should have known. But the comments were not kind. So my question to you again is, if we just did the 2 out of the 3, which one discussed, one we did, can we survive?
I think the more, even with those 3, there's no guarantee. There's a lot of things that happen. You can't have open enrollment.
Gotcha.
You know, you gotta hopefully get some of those things back. I think the key with the 4-day is you gotta sell it. When you tell parents 4-day, then we're not going to get it. Well, it's all in those days. In fact, there's some teachers that are really excited about it. They're going to do the hobby things with it. They're going to have time to spend with kids one-on-one. They're going to do mediation with kids that need to be there. There's a lot of things that you can plug into that day that teachers are excited about. The way I had it figured, there's 15 of those days of the school year with that calendar that's there. Teachers would have to work. She changed the numbers on me, so probably 8 of them. And still, that would be their 174 instead of 186-day count. But the remediation, community service things, there's all kinds of ideas about, we need to connect with some of the companies around here, the Generacs and Santa Casa, and get people involved in what's going on in their training. Those are all days you can do those kind of things. It'd be great days for field trips, it'd be great days to take the band to, one of the nursing homes. There's all kinds of things you could do on those days for kids. And the majority of kids that are going to be here those days are going to be the younger ones because of the daycare issue. And those elementary teachers have ideas. I mean, I wish I could share all the details of that. They're excited about the possibilities.
So without reinventing the wheel, you could contact one of the districts that are already on a 4-day to find out what they're doing with day 5.
There's just none here.
Oh, I understand
And
that.
I think for us, that's a draw. People know where we are now for all the wrong reasons, because we were going to dissolve. Let's be the first ones, let's be the groundbreakers, let's make it work. I think we can.
All right, thank you.
But yeah, there's all kinds of school districts you can contact. Tom did too on something he had in Iowa.
That came out at 8:30 this morning, I'm working 3rd shift right now.
Take a look through this. There's some links in there with schools that have done this.
And most of them, just as you said, struggled the first year especially, but it was mainly because of those child care issues. And I think we're addressing that.
Yeah, and there really wasn't one that said they could go back.
I've got 4 different printouts here on some of them, but there's a ton of stuff that you just put in 4-day week. Actually, one of the best sources, believe it or not, I thought was Wikipedia, because they had just questions and answers, and but just pretty common to what I drew out of all the other ones I looked at.
You with us? Okay.
So she tells that she's gonna play around with some of these numbers and kind of get some projections out so we can all kind of look at it.
Corey's just verifying that you'll be able sooner we can get it into the hands of the board to look at before the meeting, the better.
Right, and I can calculate this out and probably get it to you to review to make sure I heard things correctly. And then if you're okay with it, you can do what you want with it.
Fair enough.
Steve,
Yeah.
could we meet next Wednesday again, do exactly this? Can Carol again get ready? She should be here, so she can actually put numbers in for us as we give
So
suggestions.
the question is, wants to propose to have a work session next Wednesday, and can you be present? I think the answer to the second question is no, based on what you told me previously.
Yeah, it kind of is.
But we could set up,
You could video, do
we
Zoom or
could
pick
do
a different day, doesn't have to be Wednesday.
Zoom or go to a meeting and we could, share it on Chromebooks, et cetera, before we do that. Right. 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 That's what's being proposed, I guess. Wednesday was thrown out, which is the 8th, Wednesday the 8th, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, that should work.
And you were thinking we could discuss the 4-day work
The
session.
4-day and budget issues, if Carol would be here, and, you know, we want to give her numbers, what she can put the numbers into the spreadsheet and change things pretty quick. We need to look at all of them.
Does 5:30 work for the board as a time, is fine?
Can we go through the rest of this agenda before we worry about our next meeting? And then, open the option of possible additional agenda items? I just kind of like to finish one thing before I move on to the next.
Go on to, G.
So G was just discussion of equine therapy program. Information on that.
So Carol, we're on, agenda item, G, which is the equine program. I know you had had a conversation with, insurance carrier, and they had a couple of questions that they wanted the board, to be aware of.
Basically informing them that there's a risk, of course, and any kind of waiver that you would have anyone sign is pretty much useless in Wisconsin because everybody gets drawn into it. So he just wanted to make sure you understood that risk in doing this. If you decide to do it, they'll be supporting you and they'll still be there for your insurance coverage, but you are assuming a bit of a risk.
So I included in the board packet basically a copy of the questions that the insurance carrier raised when Carol had the conversation. And again, the bottom line one, I guess as you said, Carol, was, is the district willing to assume potentially that risk and there's no waiver of that liability? There are some provisions there that the vendor would have Palmyra-Eagle as the district listed as an additional insured on their policy, et cetera, and it doesn't appear to be that that's a problem.
And who does supervise it? Who's going to be in charge of supervising? What would the district role in this whole process be?
I have some additional information on the liability that I can share on that you may not be aware of. But the state of Wisconsin has a specific statute that a person may view.
I'm going to pass the microphone to Mrs. Leroy. She's got some additional information to share. Hold on.
What committee would you serve on this?
In regards to the state of Wisconsin and the equine liability, the state of Wisconsin has something that's kind of unique when it comes to liability and horses. And they actually have a special statute that says a person is immune from civil liability for acts or omissions related to his or her participation in equine activities. If a person participating in the activity is injured or killed as a result of the risk of equine activities. Basically, it says that it's understood by everyone that there is a risk that's undertaken, and it basically makes it nearly impossible for someone to sue when they're participating in something that they already have to communicate to. And there are liability signs, if you go to any boarding stable or any horse facility, they have that statute posted everywhere. I think you can see it in some of the state trail bikes and things like that too. So there is an additional layer of protection that people engaging in equine activities have in the state of Wisconsin. So that would extend to you as a school district.
Did you catch that?
Okay, we'll double check and follow back with 80 cents, right?
I'm just repeating what the insurance company said, and the bottom line, the last item there is basically, just think it through and then do as you wish. But it's not like they're not going to cover anything. It's just trying to avoid the risk to begin with.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Lewin.
Okay, we'll move on to Fund 80 uses.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Fund 80 specifically applies to the next two items as well, which is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3-year-old daycare and the potential wraparound programming. So I believe this was talked about at least twice at a curriculum and policy committee meeting relative to the 3-year-old daycare, which evidently fits heavily into the potential of a 4-day school week, and then wraparound care program. So I know that I provided to you the link to DPI and the Fund 80. I know, Carol, that there's been additional restrictions and limitations around Fund 80. It is something the board can levy for. However, any revenue generated in Fund 80 remain in Fund 80, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So,
If you go to the website, you'll see something there called the final decision tree for the potential use of Fund 80. There are certain requirements here, and I would not recommend adopting this program until it has passed your auditor and DPI. And if they say it's good to go, then that's fine. But they did crack down, DPI cracked down a lot on usage of Fund 80 because it was kind of taken advantage of years ago. So if the DPI is good with it, I don't have a problem with it. Just keep in mind that if you are going to tax, that's going to increase your tax levy. It's not part of the revenue limit. It's a separate levy. And that's added to the levy that you're already going to be charging for gingerbread.
So what would you and/or I need to know from the board relative to the questions we asked the auditor and the DPI?
Well, basically, what the program is going to entail, any fees that are going to be charged, and fees could kind of, I think that's what they want to make sure that the fees are charged fairly. And you can get more criteria on that, but I think I would start with the DPI as if you can give us, okay, we're going to run this daycare program for 3-year-olds beginning at this time, and we're going to charge them this much money, and how is it all going to work? One of the first questions they asked on this tree for potential decision tree is, does the school board have a policy regarding the community programs? And although it's not required, the board is strongly encouraged to develop one. And then has the district contacted their audit firm and the school financial services team prior to instituting the proposed program? And then it's yes or no. And so if I can just get some kind of an idea of what this is going to look like, maximum number, staffing, cost, those kinds of things, and then I would contact DPI. I'd start there and see what they think.
So I did reach out to Neola because after I looked at our policies, there is no policy that Neola recommends. I do think we could probably find some other sample districts, perhaps that are not within Neola, that might help provide some clarity to us. relative to the policy. I think that the implication was that you're on better footing if you have a locally adopted board policy when you go to have a conversation with your auditor and the Department of Public Instruction. You can tell them, yes, we have a policy. I think I can do a look-see around that.
Okay. And then, as I understand it, money that's generated in funding stays in funding, so it's not something that you can offset any Fund 10 expenditures. That's my understanding, and if I'm wrong, I will admit it. But I think that is supposed to be included in your budget for Fund 80, is any revenue generated through taxes and any revenue generated through fees that you're charging to help offset the cost.
Carol, but those fees within that could be used for like additional playground equipment, even though the non-daycare or 3K students would be utilizing it, as well as some of the like we use Fund 80 currently for the maintenance on the fields. Is that correct?
Did you hear?
I heard it started that, that to pay for playground equipment and things of that nature. Is that what you said?
Yes, and other playground activities that may or may not be used by the rest of the school.
And then I can see them doing that, all of that, if it's open to the community. That it's not just, for the school. I think it has to be available to all community members.
I think the implication is that certain playground equipment that would be more age appropriate to preschoolers, 3-year-olds, et cetera.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, were there other comments, questions around?
Yeah, I would like to know how much you're going to pay the teachers. What are you going to offer to teachers? And, benefits, that kind of thing needs to be considered as well.
That's why I think we need to actually have some committee meetings so we can delve into this a little bit further rather than just a workshop. But for guidance purposes, someone directed me to Oconto Falls. They have their own. I've also contacted Fort Atkinson, Jefferson, and Dr. Bloom, I think you talked to Greendale about their wraparound daycare at least.
I did, correct. Yep. And in Greendale, it's not district sponsored, they're district facilities, but it's run through the rec department.
And which we, not here, but as the proposal that was generated prior to being on the board by some of us now appointed to the board, one of the things that we also discussed was perhaps moving Park and Rec and saving our constituents' tax funds by bringing that within the school district. And that, I'm thinking, could be a funding project as well.
Did you catch that last part, Carol? The implication was that potentially partnership with the Park and Rec Department. Anything that I can look at is that if the district takes on this responsibility other than community space for an outside organization or a private vendor, it's very cumbersome, and the district has to have that program approved through the DPI prior to operation. And as you can imagine, there's all kinds of requirements and state inspections and so forth that have to be happening. So I think we have to look at it from a couple of lenses. One, is there a partner out there? And or two, if it's held on-site and district sponsored, what does that look like? So that's where I think the question about teacher wage and there's certain certifications that would have to come in there.
Exactly.
If we were to run it through Park and Rec, and have Park and Rec housed within the school district, Bigfoot Schools does that. They do their Park and Rec through their school district. So that might be a resource to check.
Okay.
So I think does that cover
yesterday, I have 3 applications for the PR position we posted several weeks ago. One of the individuals that applied very early on also at the committee request submitted some portfolio samples, and the other activity we were going to ask people to do is to create a postcard that would provide a positive image of the district. Then we had the coronavirus set in, and so I had an opportunity to interview meetings scheduled with the first candidate, and at that point there was only one. We subsequently now had 2. I guess what I'd like to attempt to do is to engage the PR committee in trying to coordinate those interviews. We can do them virtually, certainly, but I need to get the portfolio contributions from the other 2 candidates, assuming we want to see all 3 individuals, as well as the postcard piece, or the mailer, if you will, from all 3 of those individuals. So I had contact with all 3 of those individuals electronically. They're all interested, obviously, they wouldn't have applied. They're still interested, but no, we're a little bit handicapped by the school closing and the mandate to maintain distance and space. So some feedback from the committee, I think I shared that with the full board the other day. You can probably engage these people truly given your work schedule at any point in time. Tom, I don't know, you're probably the one more restrictive in terms of availability of time, but maybe I could send out some dates and we could maybe coordinate. That's the direction the committee would like to go, to have a conversation with these folks.
So you're thinking that we'd be involved with the interview process?
I'm not calling it an interview, I'm calling it a meeting with the candidates.
Okay, would we have, in the past, we were going to have an administrator besides yourself?
Correct, and at that point in time, that was going to happen that Tuesday that school got canceled. I can certainly invite people in again with technology. If they're available, we certainly weigh them in. I think the important thing would be that everybody's involved with the conversation with all of the applicants. I don't know if you want to meet all 3 of them, so take some time to review their credentials, and we can kind of go from there. That'll help guide in terms of how much time we need.
And they haven't all submitted the materials yet?
That is correct. Only the one.
The first.
Yeah, the first one. And I can resend that to the entire board if you can't find that, or if you want to see that again.
Yeah, I think if we could have them all resubmit, I know we're under a health scare, but I still think PR has a lot of work to accomplish, even if school is canceled. So, once again, I still think that we need to address those agenda.
I would recommend that, and we're getting close to the end, if we have another meeting next week, I think we put everything on that agenda. I've had 2 board members tell me that we should be doing this so that all board members hear the conversation and basically not have committees, because in essence, at some committees, there's 5 of the board members there to begin with. It's in essence a board meeting, so let's just call it a work session. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
Except the problem with that I see is that work sessions, we can't make any recommendations to the board. Committee meetings, as I was told, is where the work occurs. And it doesn't, I understand that we are having as many people as we do. However, we don't have the ability to make the recommendations. If we're going to treat it as a workshop, we only get to ask questions and answers. We don't get to make a recommendation.
No committee meeting makes a decision anyway.
No, but we make a recommendation was my word.
Correct, and I think that what we've learned tonight is that for the first time, all the full board is hearing and having conversation around some very critical things. My recommendation is that continue.
Well, the reason that they're hearing it for the first time is that we had a committee meeting that we brought things up, and we haven't had a regular board meeting since then. That's why they haven't heard it. So, and they didn't attend the committee meeting where it was discussed. So, I just think that committees are where we are supposed to do our work, rather than just have information presented.
still have to post and we still have to adhere to open meetings law.
What were you saying?
Zoom is instead of being in a room, whatever, Zoom is a feature that you can do, so you can have meetings, I guess I don't know if there's a general login, others can do how that works, but usually it's a video conference.
If all board members and public are invited to committee meetings because they're open meetings and those agendas are posted and anyone can come, why would we have to have a setup like this? Why couldn't we? I don't understand what's the difference of having this work session and having a committee meeting.
The only thing we have to adhere to is social distancing.
Yeah, and that would like similar, because like, if you guys were having a finance meeting and I thought, well, what you're discussing is nothing I can have, I wouldn't be here. I think we had more board members at the first committee meetings that we had because a lot of people were new and the committees hadn't met in over a year because everybody thought we were dissolving. So I think board members and public people wanted to come to those meetings, there hadn't been any, and hear what's going on. So I don't know that going forward, we should can the committee system.
Maybe we have both, work session and committee meetings.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work.
And there's some committees, like Mrs. Parsons said, that haven't met for a very long time, and they definitely should be.
And especially like meetings when curriculum policy, for example, sometimes we needed to bring in the principals. We brought in Matt last time, we brought in Carrie. Do we really want Matt and Carrie to have to sit through a whole work session when we're talking about 15 other things, if they have other things they're doing? I think committee meetings can bring in specific people to ask questions. And again, I want them, they're still open and anybody can come. But then the people that we're bringing in for expertise perhaps in different things don't have to sit through it's been 2.5 hours. They don't have to sit through that. They can come to the committee meeting. That just makes sense to me. I don't know what the downside of it would be.
And fortunately, we're getting to the end of the agenda for the work session, so it has been 2.5 hours. So, yeah, I guess I have no problem continuing. I just am echoing what I heard from a couple of board members, which was they truly wanted to be a part of and hear what the rest of you were thinking, and the work session provided that opportunity. If we're having one as soon as next Wednesday, there's any number of items that could be included on that agenda. I guess, Corey, I look to you as president for some guidance there, since you and I were in part those that determined not to hold some of those meetings because of the coronavirus outbreak.
This week was just a simple one, just to consolidate into one night, to have us here, some cleaning and disinfecting and et cetera. We tried it, we're gonna do it. Weekends going forward, I'm guessing hopefully we could use a little bit more of the video type usage and things like that. But since we were scheduled to have 2 nights of committee meetings, I wanted to consolidate it into one, just because of cleaning, disinfecting, having people here. So that's that. Going forward, I think we can be open to other options.
Perfect. Thanks for the guidance.
So, am I to understand that we'll be scheduling a PR committee meeting then? As well as the workshop? Okay.
Yeah.
I would like a curriculum and policy committee meeting as well. Not to be greedy, but I think we have work to do there as well.
Well, gee, you don't want to HR.
I'm okay now with HR, I got across some of the things, we went over the benefits, so I think we were pretty well good in terms of that. So if we want to do curriculum and development, NPR, that would be fine, I think HR is okay.
I do know people have mentioned about buildings and grounds hasn't met for a very long time, and I just think all of our committees still need to work.
Buildings and grounds, if we're moving students to another building, I would think buildings and grounds would want to meet perhaps at that building, just to get their heads around some questions and things. So I'm not on that committee.
I'm not either.
So to throw this out there, one of the things that the board did, and I think that's a great point, the board did intentionally was not to have multiple nights where multiple members were serving on multiple committees, but 3 of those standing committees meant the half-hour increments prior to the regularly scheduled board meeting. That way you were carving out the second Tuesday of the evening, and depending upon which committee you were on, you would serve perhaps an hour or that hour and a half, that 90-minute time frame. If you want to go back to that, that's probably the most efficient and economical use of everyone's time. To meet an additional 3 hours, 3 different nights of the week in addition to the board meeting is asking an awful lot of a lot of people. And there is a lot of work that to be done, but C&P used to meet Thursday prior to the board meeting, and then building and grounds, finance, and PR would meet in those 30-minute increments prior to the 7 o'clock regularly scheduled board meeting. You can certainly give that some consideration as well.
I do think we're asking a lot of these people, but I think a good amount of these people jumped in knowing that we were going to be asking a heck of a lot of them, and jumped in with, we're here to make a difference, and we want to change things, and we want to get this district going again. And I really doubt we have a big fight from people who are here because they want to see things going. That's why everyone was fighting so hard to have this meeting tonight. And if we're going to ask our teachers to take a 5% pay cut, I think we can give some of our time. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, you guys do that, I'm going to sit home and self-quarantine. But, so I do not think that's asking too much. It's not asking too much of me.
It's not asking too much of me either, and things were not progressing at the rate that they should have been by that previous committee schedule. And that's all I'll say.
Okay, so I'll put out a feeler to the respective committees as requested, and we'll get gatherings together. I would recommend we do so before the next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is the 14th. So in that time frame between now and then, does that seem reasonable? Okay.
Should we can bump up to the work session, like?
Right, I heard too, should we do a special, and Steve and Jeff, the amount of work that we are trying to do with the daycare and things, should we have a new committee for new committee agenda meetings or for areas that aren't
Special projects?
Yeah, or add them to the current ones so that they get it, so there is a dedicated time on it. Because otherwise what are we gonna do with them in between?
It seems like any of those topics could probably readily fit under those standing committees.
Should we just, you just,
Curriculum and policy is pretty broad,
put them in,
programmatic topics.
because I just was thinking we should do that, right? Don't you think, to get meet zones on some of this stuff?
Well, if we voted unanimously to hire Jeff, and for special projects and things that the board was going to direct him to do, so I think that would be appropriate, that would be an ad hoc committee, which we can throw out there. That would mean until some of these things are off the ground a little bit more, because a lot of those things are going to take a lot of footwork. And if there's a committee directing some of it, and if the ones that we would direct Jeff to would, I don't know, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, we gotta do something to be able to have so that it's not a surprise. Otherwise we have Jeff working and we're doing stuff, but we gotta have better communication so that it's not, and it's, a lot of this is COVID-19, I'm not lying. And I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted because I have emergency information I gotta get to people that can't go into work tonight. So it's just, it's evolving. It's not a good time to be dealing with this on top of everything else we have. But the bottom line is, we have a responsibility to the parents of this district to get things going. And we gotta figure out the best way to do it and keep on moving. We've gotten some good groundwork done, but I think we need a good method of doing it. And I think if the committee method, it is, a lot of times you can get more things done in small groups. So if we do the committees, we have a place then, Steve and Jeff are both there. It's being recorded. People are available to come if they want. It's open. Everybody hears and sees. It should be a lot easier for the community to understand that we're working. I think we just gotta do it. And it's, I think small meetings, 10 people, right? It's
No more than that.
no more than 10. Generally, we don't have more than 10 in a committee.
Well, yeah, and again, so the mandate and the safer at home and the no more than 10 kind of flies in the face of open meeting requirements,
Yeah.
as you can see this evening. But this room is large enough for people to social distance.
Yeah, so.
And we are recording it.
Yep.
This was a work session, so there was no requirement for public comment. But one of the things for the board to consider that's been talked about, and some districts have decided to do so in light of the concern for COVID-19, is you can make an emergency determination at a regularly scheduled board meeting not to take citizens' comments during the duration of the pandemic.
Okay.
So I was going to talk about that at some other time, but it fits well with your commentary. We still would have the opportunity to record and to publicize. The other thing you could do would be to make an arrangement if you still wanted comments from people to be offered electronically.
Yep,
As
if you
an
have an
example.
email address or something offering.
Right, so there are ways to be able to do that, it's just a little bit more cumbersome. And again, this is a unique
It's a
circumstance.
unique circumstance, it's not normal, we're not operating under normalcy right now. But, so Steve, if you want to kind of present us, you can send like your idea of these areas and what, that'd be perfect, thank you.
I think then for the last item, Doris has already called time.
What?
It's been a long time sitting here.
No, I mean, I'm saying I'm
Yeah.
sitting here, I'm,
No.
I'm just saying these take a lot longer.
So the last item, and then we go to close.
Okay, so, the community recognition program.
Nothing's been done on it properly.
Yeah, that came out of PR, so you recognized me last month, I think. There was a desire to do something fairly regularly. I don't know, Tom, do you have an update on the sandwich board?
No, I have not talked to Mike.
Coronavirus might have gotten away with that too,
I'm assuming it has.
essentially, so.
The good news is V has his plaque that I gave him. That's right as gas register. You walk in and pay, it's right in front. Yeah, it looks good. The pump looks good down there too. What he's doing.
PR also discussed, we would like to alternate, we would like to have our next meeting recognize student accomplishments. We talked about our state solo and ensemble people, as well as like our the scholar athlete things. I think I'd have to review the minutes, I didn't for the workshop, but we did talk about alternating between student recognition as well as business recognition. And Tara, can I share? For Tara, they deposited up to $4,100 now in Save Our Kids. So pumps 3 and 4 are busy.
Awesome. Even with cheap gas prices.
And nobody being able to